We spend a lot of time talking about how much the world has changed since the advent of computers and digital technology. But I think a lot of people forget that the people who pioneered this technology are still very much part of our community. And that's crazy to think about. Fortunately, I had the opportunity to interview two police officers. One that was on the cutting edge of the first computers to be used in law enforcement, and a current law enforcement officer. This was a really neat way for me to see how much the use of the technology has changed over the years. Would you like to introduce yourself for us?
Jack Lester?
I have heard that you used to work for the New York Police Department. What did you do for them?
I started out as just a regular police officer. I happened to go on in June of '67. It was right around the time of their having all the riots in New York City, Brooklyn, Newark, New Jersey, and they badly needed policemen, and they happened to have a backlog of applicants. So they quickly ran out and made a whole bunch. I got appointed on June 15th, and I was out in the street in a blue uniform 3 or 4 days later. They took us up to the range, Rodman's Neck, at night and turned on the big floodlights and headlights in the cars. And we qualified with the 38 at night at the range. Normally, you go to the academy for up to 6 months. 3 days after I got appointed, I was working in Brooklyn, complete blue uniform, gun on my hip.
Now, but you didn't stay a patrol cop for super long, right? You made a shift in what you were doing.
But while I was directing in the traffic division temporarily, I had occasion to go into a police department building to use the bathroom. And I noticed a sign saying EDPD, Electronic Data Processing Division. It turned out that was the first computers that the police department had, the 1400 series. And I ran upstairs and volunteered. I don't know exactly when that was, but a couple of months later, it turned out they had ordered the latest and greatest computers from IBM.
Ooh.
And they barely needed bodies. And anybody who would put down on his original paperwork that they had even knew how to operate a card sorter was called in for an interview and asked if you wanted to transfer. Almost everybody that was called in did transfer because it was an opportunity to get off the street out of uniform into plain clothes. You just wore a regular shirt and trousers every day. And it was strictly days, 8 to 4, 9 to 5. So it was very good for somebody who was married and had a family, wanted to live a normal hours life. I went in as a data gatherer. At that time, they were building the software for the 911 system. And what they had was this data on tens of thousands of punch cards of addresses on streets and places on those streets. And they were all put on a tape. And then the tape had to be printed out and was given to a couple of cops who went out in a unmarked car in their civilian clothes to check the addresses so that everything that went into the computer was correct.
Make sure that the people living at that address?
The addresses were valid, so that when you called 911 and gave them an address, they knew it was a valid address. They knew what side of the street it was on. They knew what precinct it was in, and they knew what sector police car covered that particular address.
When you call the 911 system now, your cell phone is able to give your GPS location to the dispatcher, so that if for whatever reason your call gets disconnected or you're in an unfamiliar area and you don't know the address of where you are, they can get that information. But before cell phones, that wasn't an option.
And also, you were made aware if there was any, quote, sensitive locations nearby, whether that be a church or a synagogue, a hospital, anything like that. Everything was.
Knowledge of these sensitive locations is really going to help officers plan their approach. If you get a call on a Sunday at lunchtime and there's a church around the corner, you can almost guarantee there are going to be a lot of pedestrians in the road or on the sidewalks. So you're going to want to make sure you route yourself around that. Or if you have somebody that's threatening violence, you're going to be able to alert that location so that they're able to keep all of their patrons safe.
Marked on cards and put into the computer system, so that when you called 911 and called in an address, the guy at the receiving the call could actually tell instantly what you were talking about and what was around you, and if that was a sensitive location.
Now, what would have happened before you built this computer system?
The cops that had the sector knew, and the dispatchers pretty much, who had formerly been street cops, a lot of the addresses that was involved.
I mean, that's an insane amount of knowledge to just be carrying around that no one else could access. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Do you use like computers and technology at work, or is it like old school, like in the movies where you take your notepad and you write all the clues down?
Policing has changed a lot, especially with the advent of technology. I think the oldest piece of technology I use is actually my hand. When I walk up to a car, I don't usually take a notebook, pen, paper, anything like that, because most people carry their driver's licenses. But I like to keep my hands free, so I'm able to do all sorts of stuff. But if they happen to forget something, or they don't have their license, or I'm trying to conduct some sobriety testing, but I don't want to have my hands full, I take notes on my Palm Pilot. I don't know if any of your viewers will get that one, but I'll write everything down on my hand. But that's usually the oldest piece of technology I personally use, because most police departments have the funding to be able to go to computers, and we've got multiple different programs that we're able to. The one program that I use a lot, I can run your license plate. I can see who the registered owner is. I can run any driver's license in the state, and I can see their driving history, their criminal history, their court history.
Oh, wow.
And I can have a really good idea of who I'm going to be working with. And even if for whatever reason my computer, my internet's down, I can still call in over the radio, and somebody at the other end of the radio at the dispatch center can run that same information. So today I can type up a ticket, click print, and be done with a traffic stop in 3 to 5 minutes without.
So you have a computer and a printer in your patrol car?
I do.
Wow.
I've got my computer with a mount on there, so that doesn't go flying all over the place. I've got internet built into my car, and I've got a printer that uses the thermal printing, so it doesn't even have to worry about ink or anything like that. I just have to swap out the paper.
So, and now you mentioned that when you look up somebody, you get a lot of information about them before you interact with them. Does that make it easier to profile?
So yeah, we get a lot of this information, but I wouldn't necessarily say it makes it easier to profile. I mean, I guess personally, I don't think so. I guess if you're using it, if you're just one of those bad apples, it could easily be done that way. It could be conceivable that people would use it for that purpose, but 99.9% of the people out there that work in law enforcement, they kind of do it the way I do it. I don't really know who I'm stopping until I decide to run those plates.
So I've been talking with some current law enforcement officers, and every one of them has a computer in their cars. I mean, computers have changed a ton. So, I mean, how much of that did you get to watch happen?
Well, what they did have, we had a little system that was paid for with federal money that was attached to the vehicle identification system. Could sit in the car and type in a license plate, and it would zoom into the computer, do a quick check, come back and tell them whether or not it was stolen. But that was pretty much the extent of what was actually in the car. It was still, with the 911 system, it was just still strictly radio that went into headquarters and the 911 division, and then they put it into the computer.
So the 911 division, though, was for all 5 boroughs of New York City, or?
I think at one time it was probably broken down into boroughs.
Mhm.
But as time went by, and of course, there was quite a huge resistance to using the computer at first because it was new. It was not the way they did it. The old days, when you called in, the guy that got the call, the cop that got the call, wrote the information on a punch card, and then he put it on a belt. Because of the belt that he put it on, it would get sent to the Manhattan dispatcher, or maybe the Brooklyn dispatcher, or the Staten Island dispatcher. Now the computer did all that. But initially, and I was working in the operations end of it, I was an operator in more ways than one, when they first started this, and if the computer even hiccuped, we had a hot phone that went from 911, which was downtown, to us in the police academy where the computers were. But anyhow, some sergeant or lieutenant would say, "We're going back to slips. We're going back to slips." And then we'd have to fix whatever it was that was out of sync, start it back up again, then call them and say, "Okay, back to using the computer." And then
That's
as
crazy.
time went by and more of the old timers retired, you got these new guys who didn't know the city as well, unless they happened to work or live in that particular area. So they depended on a computer. And I used to tease my wife, come home and say it was a bad day at work. The computer was down. We all had to think for ourselves.
But I mean, in many ways, that's still true.
Like if I'm sitting running radar with a LiDAR, or I'm looking for seat belts, I don't see. If I'm looking for seat belts, yeah, I'm gonna at least see the driver. But 90% of the time, I don't know who I'm interacting with until I've already made the decision to pull them over. And sometimes there are even times where I don't necessarily get time to run the tag before I get out of my car. So I'll walk up to the car, have a pleasant conversation with them, and get back to my car, find out they're a convicted felon. In general, I approach everything the same way. And it's not that I'm following, I mean, to an extent, I'm following the script, but it's not a script that I was taught. It's a script that kind of protects me, because then if I treat everyone the same, then there's not really a lot of room to complain about. And you can't accuse me of doing stuff if I treat everyone the exact same.
They built a fingerprint system, and they loaded all fingerprints that we had available, from the cops to my fingerprints were in there twice. Once as being a cop, and once having applied for a taxi license in New York City. There were just very slight differences. It depends on the skill of the person who reads the print. You stuck your thumb or whatever into an special ink pad, and then it went on a piece of cardboard. And then some human being had to read that.
Oh, and mark the points.
And mark the points and the whirls and crevices or whatever. And they each got assigned a numerical value and then went into the computer.
Wow. That's awesome.
It is. It's unbelievable.
Like I said, technology's made everything so much more different from back in the days in the Stone Age, as all the cool kids call it.
It's incredible to look at how two careers 50 years apart have caused these men to both have very similar attitudes towards the technology. They both have the approach that technology is great, but sometimes old school is going to help you. And you know, people like Jack created this wonderful technology that now Trooper John is using. And not only is he using it, he's using a combination of that and the old school technology. Technology is never the answer to all the world's problems, but it's going to help us progress further and better at a higher quality.